The rain came down like a punishment that Tuesday night in Portland. Garrison Mercer gripped the steering wheel of his delivery truck, squinting through the windshield as the wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour. His back ached from 12 hours of hauling boxes across the city. His eyes burned from staring into headlights reflecting off wet asphalt. The digital clock on the dashboard glowed an accusatory 2:15 in the morning. 35 years old, and this was his life now. 3 years ago, everything had been different. He had been a software engineer at a respected tech firm downtown, pulling in six figures, living in a sleek apartment with his wife Catherine and their daughter. They had talked about buying a house with a backyard, maybe getting a dog. The future had seemed like something to look forward to. Then Catherine died in a car accident, and the world stopped making sense. He quit the job that demanded 60-hour weeks, sold the apartment that echoed with her absence, bought a rundown Victorian on the outskirts of Portland, the kind of house that creaked and groaned like an old man settling into a chair. The paint peeled from the siding in long strips. The floors sagged in places where the foundation had shifted. The back door never latched properly, no matter how many times he swore he would fix it. But the night shifts as a delivery driver meant he could be home during the day. He could make breakfast for Emmeline. He could walk her to school. He could be the father she needed, even if he had forgotten how to be anything else. Emmeline was 7 now. She had her mother's eyes, the same shade of warm brown that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, and her mother's stubborn streak that showed itself in the set of her jaw when she did not get her way. She had a way of looking at him sometimes that made his chest ache with everything he had lost and everything he was terrified of losing. The house materialized through the rain, a dark shape against a darker sky. Garrison pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. For a moment he just sat there, listening to the rain hammer against the roof, gathering the energy to move. Mrs. Pemberton next door would have put Emmeline to bed hours ago. The elderly widow had become something of a surrogate grandmother since they moved in, always happy to watch the little girl during Garrison's shifts in exchange for nothing more than occasional help with yard work and someone to talk to over tea. The house would be empty and quiet now, filled with shadows and the smell of damp wood and stale coffee. He would take a hot shower, collapse onto the couch, do it all again tomorrow. This was his life. This was enough. He fumbled with his keys at the front door, stepped inside and kicked off his muddy boots without turning on the lights. The bathroom was straight down the hall. He could navigate this house blindfolded by now. Every creaky floorboard memorized, every shadow familiar. He pushed open the bathroom door and flipped the switch. The fluorescent light buzzed to life, and Garrison Mercer stopped breathing. There was a woman standing in front of the mirror. She was soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her shoulders in dripping ropes that left puddles on the tile floor. Water pooled beneath her feet, spreading slowly toward the bathtub. She wore a thin t-shirt and jeans that clung to her frame like a second skin, offering no protection against the cold that had turned her lips a frightening shade of blue. Her face was pale, almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent light, and her eyes were red and swollen in a way that spoke of hours of crying. For one disorienting second, Garrison thought he was hallucinating. Sleep deprivation could do that. He had read about it somewhere, how the brain started manufacturing things that were not there after too many hours without rest. But then she moved. She whipped around to face him, her eyes going wide with pure animal terror. She pressed herself back against the sink, her hands gripping the porcelain edge so hard her knuckles went white, as if she could somehow phase through the wall behind her if she just pushed hard enough. Her voice came out as a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent bulb. "Please, they are going to kill me tonight. Just let me stay until morning. Then I will disappear forever, I swear." Garrison's hand moved instinctively toward his pocket, where his phone waited. 911. That was what any reasonable person would do. There was a stranger in his house at 2 in the morning, a woman who had somehow gotten inside while he was at work, while his daughter was sleeping just down the hall at Mrs. Pemberton's house. But then his eyes dropped to her wrists, bruises, purple and black, shaped unmistakably like fingers. Someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave marks that would take weeks to fade, and suddenly, impossibly, he recognized her. The memory surfaced like a bubble rising through dark water. 1 week ago, a convenience store on Division Street. He had stopped to grab energy drinks after his shift, standing in line behind a woman arguing with the cashier about the price of bread. Outside the window, huddled under the narrow awning to escape the rain, there had been another woman. She had been counting out coins with shaking hands, trying to scrape together enough change for the cheapest sandwich on the rack. Something about her had struck him then. Not pity exactly, though there was certainly that. Recognition. She had the look of someone who had once had everything and lost it all. Someone fighting to maintain some shred of dignity in circumstances designed to strip it away. He had seen that look in his own mirror often enough to recognize it in someone else. He had not said much. He never did these days. He had simply pulled an extra sandwich from his own bag and held it out to her. "Here, take this." She had looked up at him with an expression of weary surprise, as if kindness was something she had stopped expecting. The rain had plastered her hair to her face, and her jacket was so thin it might as well have been made of paper. "Thank you," she had whispered. And then she had vanished into the rain, and he had not thought about her again until this exact moment. "The convenience store," he said slowly, the pieces clicking together. "Last week. That was you." Her shoulders dropped slightly, some of the tension draining out of her rigid posture. Shame colored her pale cheeks, bringing the first hint of color he had seen. "I followed you that night after you gave me the sandwich. I watched which direction you walked, memorized the streets. I was not stalking you, I swear. I just needed to remember where kindness lived." Her voice cracked on the last word. "You were the only person who treated me like a human being in weeks. And tonight, when they almost found me, I did not know where else to go. The back door was unlocked. I just needed somewhere to hide until morning." Garrison studied her. The blue lips, the violent shivering that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her bones, the way she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold in what little warmth remained. Every rational thought screamed at him to call the police, but he remembered what it felt like to hit bottom. After Catherine died, there had been a week when he could not bring himself to sleep in their apartment. The bed was too empty, the silence too loud. He had spent the nights in his car, parked in empty lots across the city, staring at nothing, trying to figure out how to keep breathing when every breath felt like a betrayal. Nobody had helped him then. Nobody had even noticed. "What is your name?" "Celine. Celine Ashford." "All right, Celine." He heard the words coming out of his mouth as if someone else were speaking them, as if he were watching himself from a great distance. "One night, but first you take a hot shower, warm up before you catch pneumonia. There are clean towels in the cabinet, and then you tell me everything. The whole truth, start to finish. Because if I find out you are lying to me about any of this, I will call the police so fast your head will spin." Her eyes went wide with disbelief. Tears spilled over, cutting tracks down her colorless cheeks. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means. You have no idea." He grabbed a towel from the linen closet and handed it to her, then stepped out of the bathroom and closed the door behind him. In the kitchen, he filled the kettle and set it on the stove, his hands shaking slightly as he turned on the burner. What the hell was he doing? 30 minutes later, Celine emerged from the bathroom looking less like a drowned creature and more like a human being hanging onto the edge of a cliff by her fingernails. Color had returned to her cheeks, pink instead of that terrifying gray-white. Her hair was still damp, but no longer dripping. She had wrapped herself in the towel like a shawl, and the wild terror in her eyes had softened into something closer to bone-deep exhaustion. Garrison gestured to the kitchen table, where he had set out a mug of chamomile tea and a plate of hastily assembled food. Leftover beef stir-fry over rice, reheated in the microwave. Nothing fancy, but hot and filling. She sat down and wrapped her hands around the mug, absorbing the warmth like it was the first kindness she had felt in weeks, because it probably was. "Start from the beginning," Garrison said, settling into the chair across from her. "Tell me everything." And she did. Celine Ashford was 32 years old. Until 3 months ago, she had been the executive assistant to Dominic Hartwell, the CEO of Zenith Dynamics, a mid-sized technology company specializing in logistics software. She had worked there for 4 years, climbing from receptionist to Hartwell's right hand through competence, discretion, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. He trusted her with everything: financial reports, client contracts, the kind of sensitive information that could make or break the company. She had been good at her job, the best assistant he had ever had, he used to say. Organized, discreet, professional to a fault. Too professional, as it turned out. One night, working late to finalize quarterly reports for the board meeting, she had stumbled onto something she was never meant to see: discrepancies in the financial records, money flowing through accounts that did not seem to exist, vendor payments to companies she had never heard of in 4 years of managing Hartwell's calendar, transfers disappearing into offshore banks in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, millions of dollars being siphoned out of Zenith Dynamics through an elaborate network of shell companies and fraudulent invoices. Dominic Hartwell was not running a technology company. He was running a money laundering operation. Celine made the mistake of confronting him directly. She had been naive enough to think there might be an innocent explanation, some accounting error that could be corrected, some misunderstanding that would dissolve under the light of rational conversation. Hartwell had not gotten angry. He had not raised his voice or threatened her or done any of the things she might have expected. Instead, he had smiled, and that smile, calm and cold and utterly devoid of humanity, had been the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "You know too much now, Celine," he had said, his voice pleasant, almost friendly. "That is unfortunate, for both of us." Within 48 hours, her life had been dismantled with surgical precision. She was fired for embezzlement, framed with fabricated evidence that appeared overnight. Emails from her account authorizing fraudulent transfers she had never made. Access logs showing her entering restricted files she had never opened. A paper trail so convincing that it painted her as the architect of the very crime she had uncovered. Her bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. Her landlord evicted her, claiming unpaid rent that she had always paid on time. Her car was repossessed. Her phone was disconnected. Every door she tried to open slammed shut in her face. And then the men started appearing. "They are not police," Celine said, unconsciously rubbing the bruises on her wrist in a gesture that had become habit. "One of them caught me last week in an alley behind a grocery store. He wanted to know if I had kept any evidence, if I had copied any files before they locked me out. I managed to get away, but barely." "Why not go to the actual police? File a report?" The bitter laugh that escaped her lips was answer enough. "Hartwell donates hundreds of thousands of dollars to police charities every year. He sponsors the annual law enforcement gala. He plays golf with the commissioner every Sunday morning at the country club. If I walked into a police station, they would call him before I finished giving my statement. His lawyers would be there before I finished my coffee." She looked directly into Garrison's eyes, and the raw desperation in her gaze made something twist in his chest. "He will kill me to keep the secret. I know too much to be allowed to live, and I have proof." "Proof?" "A USB drive. Everything I copied before they locked me out of the system. Transaction records, account numbers, routing information, emails between Hartwell and his offshore contacts. Enough to bring down his entire operation and send him to prison for the rest of his life. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. I hid it in a locker at Union Station before they took my bag. It is the only thing keeping me alive, and it is the only thing that can destroy him. Garrison sat back in his chair, processing the avalanche of information. The story sounded like something out of a movie. Corporate conspiracy, hired thugs, a woman on the run with evidence that could bring down a powerful man. If someone had told him this story a week ago, he would have laughed and walked away. But the bruises on her wrist were real. The terror in her eyes was real. The way she had been shivering in his bathroom, blue-lipped and desperate, that was real too. All right, he said finally. You sleep in the spare room tonight. It is not much, just a cot and some old blankets. But it is warm and dry. Tomorrow we figure out what to do next. A small sound came from the doorway behind him. Garrison turned. Emmeline stood there in her cat print pajamas, the ones Catherine had bought her the month before the accident, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She must have come back from Mrs. Pemberton's house during the night, letting herself in with the key she wore on a string around her neck for emergencies. She was looking at Celine with the unguarded curiosity of childhood. No fear, no suspicion, just genuine interest in this unexpected visitor. Daddy, who is she? Before Garrison could formulate an answer, Celine lowered herself slowly to Emmeline's eye level. Her voice was gentle when she spoke, careful and kind. My name is Celine. I got lost in the rain tonight, and your daddy let me come inside to get warm. He is a very kind person, your daddy. Emmeline tilted her head, studying Celine with an intensity that belied her 7 years. Children saw things adults missed, Garrison knew. They had not yet learned to look away from uncomfortable truths. You have been crying a lot, Emmeline observed matter-of-factly. Your eyes look tired, like Daddy's did when Mommy went to heaven. Celine's breath caught audibly. Yes, she admitted. I have been crying quite a bit lately. Emmeline nodded with the gravity of someone who understood more than her years should allow. That is okay. Daddy says crying does not mean you are weak. It means you have been strong for too long, and you need to let some of the strong out. She turned to her father, her expression serious in that way only children can manage. Daddy, can she stay? She looks like she needs a family. The morning brought pale sunlight filtering through rain-washed windows, and the smell of something cooking. Garrison woke on the couch with a crick in his neck, and the disorienting sense that something had fundamentally shifted in the universe while he slept. For a moment he could not place what was different. Then the smell registered. Pancakes. For a heart-stopping second, he thought he was dreaming. Catherine used to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, standing at the stove in her worn blue robe, humming songs from musicals she loved, and he pretended not to. The smell transported him back to a life that no longer existed, a life where he had not yet learned how quickly everything precious could be ripped away. But when he walked into the kitchen, it was not Catherine at the stove. Celine stood there in borrowed clothes, one of his old flannel shirts with the sleeves rolled up, and a pair of sweatpants cinched tight at the waist, flipping pancakes with practiced ease while Emmeline sat on a stool beside her, chattering happily. Miss Celine says she used to make smiley-face pancakes for her niece back in Ohio, Emmeline announced when she spotted her father. But she never learned how to make cat shapes. I am teaching her. She's not very good yet. Celine looked up, catching Garrison's eye. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, as if she were waiting for permission to exist in this space, afraid she had overstepped some invisible boundary. I wanted to say thank you somehow, she said quietly. For everything. This seemed like the least I could do. Garrison watched his daughter, really watched her for the first time in longer than he cared to admit. In the 3 years since Catherine's death, Emmeline had learned to be quiet. She ate her cereal in silence most mornings. She watched cartoons without laughing. She had become a small, serious person, carrying a weight no 7-year-old should have to bear. but right now she was giggling. Her eyes were bright. She was talking animatedly about school and her best friend Molly and the class hamster that had escaped last week and hidden in the art supplies closet. "It is more than fine," Garrison said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. They ate breakfast together at the cramped kitchen table, the three of them, sunlight streaming through windows that desperately needed cleaning. Emmeline dominated the conversation, as children do when they finally have an audience, and Celine listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at the right moments, treating Emmeline's stories about second-grade drama as if they were the most fascinating things she had ever heard. And Garrison found himself watching this woman who had appeared in his bathroom like something out of a fever dream, wondering how someone who had lost everything could still find it in herself to make a grieving child smile. After breakfast, Garrison drove Emmeline to school, kissing her forehead at the drop-off line and promising to be home when she got back. When he returned to the house, the warmth of the morning had evaporated like fog in sunlight. A black SUV was parked across the street. Two men in dark coats stood on Mrs. Pemberton's front porch, showing the elderly woman something, a photograph from the looks of it. Mrs. Pemberton was shaking her head, clutching her cardigan closed against the morning chill. But the men kept pressing, their body language aggressive even from a distance. One of the men was massive, built like someone who had spent years turning his body into a weapon of intimidation. Even from 50 yards away, Garrison could see the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, a pale raised line against weathered skin that spoke of violence survived and likely inflicted. The scarred man's eyes swept the street with the practiced vigilance of a predator scanning for prey. Garrison's blood ran cold. He parked around the corner and entered through the back door, the one that still would not latch properly despite 3 years of good intentions. "They found me," Celine whispered when he told her what he had seen. Her face had gone white, all the color from breakfast draining away in an instant. "The one with the scar on his face. His name is Tobias Crane. He is not just muscle, he is Hartwell's fixer. He handles problems permanently. We need that evidence, and we need someone we can trust to do something with it." "I told you, the police!" "Not the local police." Garrison pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts he had not touched in months. "But I know someone who might be able to help." He found the number and pressed call. Bennett Holloway answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the particular weariness of someone who had already been awake for too many hours. They had been roommates freshman year of college, back when Garrison still believed the future was something to look forward to, and Bennett had been convinced he would become a rock star before settling for law enforcement. Bennett had worked his way up through the ranks to detective in the Portland Police Department's Major Crimes Unit. They had drifted apart over the years, the way friends do when life pulls them in different directions. But Bennett was one of the few people in this world Garrison trusted without reservation. "Garrison Mercer." "Been a minute, man. What is going on?" Garrison gave him the abbreviated version, keeping his voice low even though Celine was the only one who could hear. The woman seeking shelter. The USB drive with evidence of massive financial crimes. Zenith Dynamics and Dominic Hartwell, and the men who were now hunting through his neighborhood. A long silence stretched through the phone line. "Hartwell," Bennett finally said, and his voice had changed, gone flat and careful. "You are talking about one of the biggest philanthropists in the city, golf buddy of the commissioner, board member of half the charities in town. This is not some small-time hustler we are discussing. I know exactly who he is. If what she is saying is true, and that is a significant if, this needs to go federal. The FBI handles corporate fraud at this level. Local cops cannot touch it without someone in the department tipping him off within hours. Can you help us get it to the right people?" Another pause, longer this time. "Get me the evidence. Physical USB drive, not copies. I will make sure it reaches the FBI field office without anyone knowing where it came from or who delivered it. But you need to be extremely careful. These people do not play games, and they do not leave loose ends. They arranged to meet that evening at a coffee shop downtown that Bennett knew, a place frequented by college students and writers, anonymous and public enough to be safe. Neutral ground. The drive to Union Station felt like navigating a minefield blindfolded. Garrison kept checking his mirrors compulsively, watching for the black SUV, for any sign that they were being followed. Every dark vehicle made his pulse spike. Every pedestrian who glanced their way seemed suspicious. Celine sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone bone white. The station was crowded with afternoon commuters, streams of humanity flowing in every direction, anonymous faces absorbed in their own destinations and concerns. They moved through the chaos like ghosts, keeping their heads down, trying to blend into the current of normal people living normal lives. Locker 247 was tucked into a corner near the west entrance, one of hundreds of identical metal boxes. Celine's hands trembled visibly as she worked the combination, the numbers she had memorized during weeks of running and hiding. The door swung open with a metallic screech. Inside, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was a small black USB drive. Unremarkable, ordinary, the kind of thing you might find in any office drawer in any building in any city. But this tiny piece of plastic and silicon could destroy an empire. Celine grabbed it, and Garrison caught movement reflected in the polished metal of the locker door. A figure approaching from behind, moving with purpose through the crowd. "We need to go. Right now." They walked fast, not quite running, weaving through the crowd of commuters and tourists. Garrison risked a single glance over his shoulder. A man in a dark jacket was following, phone pressed to his ear, his eyes locked on them like a missile tracking its target. He grabbed Celine's hand and pulled her into a clothing store, through racks of discounted merchandise and startled employees, past a stock room full of cardboard boxes, out a back entrance that emptied into a narrow alley reeking of garbage and rain. They ran. By the time they reached the car 3 blocks away, Garrison's lungs were burning, and his heart was attempting to beat its way out of his chest. But when he checked behind them, gasping for breath, no one had followed them out of the station. "We have it," Celine breathed, clutching the USB drive like a holy relic. "We actually have it." The meeting with Bennett went smoothly, all things considered. The detective sat across from them in a back booth of the coffee shop, his bulk somehow making the space feel safer, and plugged the drive into his department laptop. He scrolled through file after file, his frown deepening with each revelation. "This is solid," he said finally, his voice pitched low to avoid caring. "Offshore accounts in 3 different countries. Shell companies registered in Delaware and the Caymans. Falsified invoices going back at least 5 years." He pointed to a specific line item glowing on the screen. "And this. This is a record of payments to someone identified only as TC, for specialized services. Dates going back years, amounts that would make your head spin." "Tobias Crane," Celine said immediately. "The man with the scar, Hartwell's problem solver. If this TC is who you say he is, these payments could be linked to crimes far worse than money laundering. The FBI is going to have a field day with this." Bennett closed the laptop and tucked the drive into his jacket pocket. "I will get this to my contact at the Bureau tonight through channels that cannot be traced. But listen to me carefully. Stay home. Lock your doors. Do not answer for anyone you do not know personally. Do not go anywhere public until I give you the all-clear signal. We are talking 48 hours, maybe 72. Can you do that?" They drove home as the sun was setting, painting the Portland skyline in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful for a day that had held so much fear. The tension between them slowly unwound as the familiar streets of Garrison's neighborhood came into view. Ordinary houses with ordinary lives happening inside them. Emmeline was already home from school, settled in the living room with homework spread across the coffee table. Mrs. Pemberton reported that the men who had been asking questions earlier had not returned since mid-morning. Garrison thanked her profusely and locked the door behind her, then proceeded to check every window in the house. Twice. That night, after Emmeline had been tucked into bed with her stuffed elephant and her nightlight glowing softly in the corner, Garrison and Celine sat on the worn couch in the darkened living room. They watched the street through a gap in the curtains, two sentinels waiting for danger that might or might not come. "I need to tell you something," Celine said quietly, breaking a silence that had stretched for nearly an hour. "There is something on that USB drive that I did not mention before. I did not want to say anything until I was absolutely certain of what I was seeing." She pulled out her phone, where she had photographed some of the files before handing the physical drive to Bennett. Her face was pale in the glow of the screen as she scrolled to a specific image. "Look at this." It was a spreadsheet of payments, dense with numbers and coded abbreviations. Dates stretched back years. Amounts ranged from thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars. One entry near the middle of the list caught Garrison's eye and held it like a vice. March 15th, 3 years ago. The date was seared into his memory, the date Catherine died. The notation beside it read, KM, resolution complete, $75,000. KM, Catherine Mercer. The world tilted beneath Garrison's feet. The room seemed to spin around him, the walls closing in, the air growing thick and impossible to breathe. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. "I found other records of her in the system," Celine said, her voice gentle and careful, as if she were handling something fragile and infinitely precious. Catherine Mercer. She did freelance accounting work for several businesses around Portland, including some contract work for Zenith Dynamics. She was reviewing their books 3 years ago. Right before the accident, the pieces fell into place with sickening, inexorable clarity, like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Catherine had discovered the same thing Celine had: the money laundering, the fraudulent accounts, the millions of dollars flowing through channels that should not exist. And Hartwell had silenced her the same way he was trying to silence Celine now. The car accident was not an accident. The hit-and-run driver who was never caught, the truck that ran a red light and vanished into the night, all of it had been orchestrated, paid for, a $75,000 solution to a problem named Catherine Mercer. His wife had been murdered. 3 years. 3 years of grief. 3 years of trying to make sense of senseless loss. 3 years of explaining to his daughter why mommy was never coming home. And all of it built on a lie. "He killed her," Garrison said, his voice cracking like ice breaking apart. "Hartwell killed Catherine." Celine took his hand in both of hers, her grip firm and grounding. Her own eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I am so sorry. I did not know until I started going through the files more carefully. I should have told you sooner, but I was not completely sure until today, and I did not want to—" "No." Garrison wiped his face with his free hand, forcing air into lungs that seemed to have forgotten how to work. "You could not have known. Neither did I. Nobody did." He looked at her, and something hard and cold settled into his expression, replacing the grief with something sharper. "But now we know, and Hartwell is going to pay for this. For Catherine. For you. For everyone he has ever destroyed." His phone rang, shattering the moment. Unknown number. Against every instinct screaming at him not to answer, Garrison pressed accept and raised the phone to his ear. "Mr. Mercer." The voice on the other end was smooth as silk, cultured and confident, the voice of a man accustomed to boardrooms and charity galas, and getting exactly what he wanted. "I believe you have something that belongs to me, Dominic Hartwell." Garrison's hand tightened on the phone until the plastic creaked in protest. "I know what you did to my wife." A pause, then a soft, almost amused laugh. "Your wife was a smart woman. Talented accountant, very thorough. Too thorough as it turned out. I had hoped you would not make the same mistake she did. The pleasant tone hardened into something colder. Return the drive. Walk away from this. You have a daughter to think about. If you touch my daughter, you will what, Mr. Mercer? You are a delivery driver living in a house that should have been condemned years ago. I am a pillar of this community. I have lunch with the mayor. I golf with the police commissioner. Who exactly do you think people will believe when this is all over? The line went dead. Garrison stared at the phone, his blood running cold enough to freeze solid in his veins. Hartwell was not just arrogant. He was absolutely certain that his money and connections and power would protect him from anything and anyone, that he was untouchable, that the rules that governed ordinary people did not apply to him. He was wrong. 4 in the morning, the darkest hour, when the night seems endless and dawn feels like a lie. A sound woke Garrison from a restless half-sleep on the couch. Not the rain, which had started up again around midnight and had been drumming steadily against the windows ever since. Something else. Something that did not belong to the normal symphony of nighttime sounds in an old house. He sat up, every nerve in his body suddenly firing at once. A shape moved past the living room window, a shadow against deeper shadows, there and gone in an instant. Then the front window exploded inward. Glass shattered across the room like a glittering wave. Shards sprang across the carpet and furniture. The sound was enormous in the sleeping silence of the house, a thunderclap of violence that seemed to shake the walls. Celine screamed from somewhere behind him. Garrison was on his feet before conscious thought caught up with instinct. He pulled her down behind the couch, shielding her body with his own, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Through the ragged hole where the window used to be, he could see the black SUV parked in his driveway, headlights blazing like the eyes of some mechanical predator. A figure stepped out of the driver's side door, taking its time, in no hurry at all. Tobias Crane walked toward the house with the unhurried confidence of a man who had done this exact thing many times before and knew exactly how it would end. Celine. His voice carried through the shattered window, calm and conversational, almost friendly. Come outside so we can talk. You know how this ends. You have always known. Make it easy on yourself and everyone else. Garrison grabbed his phone with shaking hands. 911 first. The words tumbling out in a rush of address and emergency, and send police now. Then Bennett's number. Crane is here. He is at my house right now. Breaking in. I am already on my way. Bennett's voice crackled through the speaker, tight with tension. 15 minutes, maybe less. Just stay inside and stay alive. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 years. Crane was on the front porch now, his footsteps heavy on the old wood. He tried the door handle. The lock rattled, held firm. He tried again, harder. Then he stepped back, and Garrison heard the unmistakable mechanical sound of a gun being cocked. Go to the bathroom, Garrison whispered to Celine, his voice barely audible. Lock the door. Stay there no matter what you hear. Do not come out until I tell you or the police tell you. Understand? Garrison, no. Go, now, please. She looked at him for one long moment, her eyes filled with fear and something deeper, something that might have been love or might have been gratitude or might have been both tangled together in ways neither of them had time to sort out. Then she ran for the hallway. Garrison moved to the hall closet and grabbed the baseball bat leaning in the corner. It had been Catherine's from her company softball league, the one she had played in every summer until Emmeline was born, and life got too busy. He had never been able to bring himself to throw it away. The front door shook as Crane slammed his shoulder against it. Once, twice. The old wood groaned in protest. On the third impact, it gave way. Crane stepped through the wreckage of the door frame, his gun raised, sweeping the dark room with professional efficiency. His eyes found Garrison standing in the hallway with the bat raised, and a cold smile spread across his scarred face. The grieving husband. You should have stayed out of this. You killed my wife. The smile flickered, just for an instant. The accountant? That was just business. Nothing personal. She found something she should not have found. Same as your friend hiding in the back room. These things happen. Collateral damage. It was personal to me. Garrison swung the bat with everything he had. Crane dodged, but not fast enough. The bat caught him on the shoulder with a satisfying crack, sending him staggering sideways. The gun went off, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, and a chunk of the ceiling rained down in a shower of plaster dust. They grappled in the darkness, crashing through furniture, knocking over the lamp that had been Catherine's grandmother's, sending books flying from shelves. Garrison was not a fighter, had never been a fighter, had avoided every physical confrontation in his entire life. But 3 years of suppressed grief and rage and the fresh knowledge of his wife's murder gave him a strength he had not known he possessed. He swung the bat again, putting his whole body into it, and connected solidly with Crane's knee. The bigger man went down with a howl of pain that echoed through the house. Sirens, distant but getting closer, cutting through the night. Crane tried to raise the gun from the floor, but Garrison stomped on his wrist. The weapon skittered across the hardwood and disappeared under the couch, out of reach. Blue and red lights flooded through the broken window, painting the room in alternating flashes. Car doors slammed outside. Voices shouted commands. Bennett burst through the ruined front door, his service weapon drawn and ready, followed by uniformed officers who fanned out through the room with practiced efficiency. Do not move. Hands where I can see them. Tobias Crane, lying on the floor with his knee bent at an angle that knees were never meant to bend, slowly raised his hands in surrender. It was over. The aftermath unfolded like a fever finally breaking after days of delirium. Crane was arrested at the scene on charges of breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, and attempted murder. In the back of the police car, still convinced he was being transported to officers loyal to Hartwell, and that this was all some elaborate performance, he started talking, confessing, names, dates, methods, amounts, everything the FBI would need to build an airtight case. He confessed to Catherine's murder, described how he had stolen the truck, waited for her at the intersection she passed every day, run the light at exactly the right moment. $75,000 for 10 seconds of violence. Within 72 hours of Crane's arrest, Dominic Hartwell was taken into custody in his corner office on the top floor of Zenith Dynamics headquarters. FBI agents in blue windbreakers led him out in handcuffs, past the desks of employees who had spent years believing they worked for a legitimate businessman, in front of television cameras that had been anonymously tipped off just in time to capture every moment. The story dominated every news channel in the Pacific Northwest for weeks. Corporate corruption on a massive scale, money laundering totaling tens of millions of dollars, murder for hire to silence witnesses, the kind of scandal that launched journalism careers and sold newspapers and reminded everyone watching at home that monsters sometimes wore expensive suits and gave generously to charity. Catherine Mercer's name was mentioned in the coverage. One of Hartwell's victims, an accountant who had discovered his crimes and paid for her integrity with her life. The hit-and-run driver who had never been identified turned out to be Tobias Crane, and the truck that had killed her was eventually found rusting in a storage facility that Crane had rented under a false name 2 weeks before the murder. Garrison watched the news coverage in a daze, unable to fully process the magnitude of what had been revealed. His wife had not died in a random accident. She had been murdered for knowing the truth, for being too good at her job, for having the same moral backbone that had always been one of the things he loved most about her. And now, 3 years after he had buried her, her murderer was going to spend the rest of his life in federal prison. It did not bring her back. Nothing in this world or any other could bring her back. But there was closure now, a terrible, painful, necessary kind of peace. 2 months after the arrests, the trial began in federal court. Celine testified as the prosecution's star witness, the linchpin of the entire case. She sat in the witness box for 3 grueling days, calmly and methodically recounting every detail of Hartwell's operation, every document she had copied, every threat she had received, every night she had spent running for her life. The defense attorneys tried everything they could think of to rattle her, to paint her as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, as an unreliable witness with an axe to grind. She never wavered, not once. Garrison sat in the front row of the gallery every single day, Emmeline beside him during the less graphic portions of the testimony. He watched Celine face down the man who had destroyed her life and tried to end it, and he saw something emerge that he had not seen in her before. Strength. Not the brittle kind that comes from pretending everything is fine, from holding yourself together through sheer force of will until you finally shatter. Real strength, forged in the fire of everything she had survived. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read aloud in the hushed courtroom, the gallery erupted in murmurs and scattered applause that the judge quickly silenced. Hartwell's face went gray, the color draining away as the reality of consecutive life sentences settled over him like a shroud. His lawyers were already talking about appeals, but everyone in that room knew the appeals were formalities, empty gestures made for billing purposes. Celine turned in the witness box and found Garrison's eyes in the crowd. She was crying. So was he. They had done it. Together, they had done it. Later that evening, as the sun set over the Portland skyline in bands of gold and crimson, they stood on Garrison's back porch and watched the day end. The house had been repaired over the past weeks. The broken window had been replaced with new glass. The bullet hole in the ceiling had been patched and painted over. The front door had been rebuilt, stronger than before. It looked the same as it always had from the outside. But something fundamental had changed. It felt like a home again. Emmeline was inside at the kitchen table, working intensely on a drawing she wanted to show Celine when it was finished. Through the window, Garrison could see her bent over the paper, tongue poking out in concentration, lost in whatever world she was creating with her crayons. "What will you do now?" he asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Celine leaned against the porch railing, her face soft in the fading golden light. "The settlement from the wrongful termination lawsuit will be substantial once it finalizes. Enough to start over anywhere I want. I have been getting calls from lawyers and journalists, and even a few publishers interested in my story." She paused. "I could go anywhere. Seattle, San Francisco, New York, somewhere nobody knows my name or what happened to me." Garrison felt something constrict painfully in his chest. "Is that what you want? To leave?" She turned to look at him fully. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, and the silence was filled with everything they had not yet found the words to say. "No," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is not what I want at all." "Then stay." The words came out before he could second-guess them, before the old fears could rise up and choke them back down. He had not planned to say it, had not even allowed himself to consciously think it. But now that it was out there, hanging in the golden air between them, he knew it was the truest thing he had said in 3 years. "Stay here, with us, with Emmeline, with me." Celine's eyes glistened with gathering tears. "You do not have to offer that. You have already done so much for me, more than I could ever repay. I would never want you to feel obligated." "Obligated?" Garrison almost laughed at the absurdity of the word. "Celine, you showed up in my bathroom at 2 in the morning, looking like something the storm dragged in. And somehow you brought this house back to life. You make my daughter laugh for the first time in 3 years. You make me remember what it feels like to want a future, To believe there might be something worth looking forward to. His voice cracked slightly. If anyone should feel obligated here, it is me. Garrison, I am not good at this, he admitted, the words coming faster now. I have not been good at anything except surviving for 3 years, just getting through each day, putting one foot in front of the other, trying not to fall apart. But I want to be good at this, at being there for you, at building something new together, if you will let me try. Celine reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his like they had been designed to fit together. I would like that, she whispered, more than anything I have ever wanted. They stood there as the light faded from gold to purple to the deep blue of approaching night, hands intertwined, watching the first stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Inside the house, Emmeline finished her drawing and ran to the window to find them. She saw her father and the woman who had appeared in their bathroom like some kind of miracle, standing close together on the porch, their faces soft with something the 7-year-old could not quite name, but recognized instinctively as important. She smiled to herself and went back to the table to add one more thing to her picture. 1 year later, spring had finally arrived in Portland. The cherry trees along the waterfront had exploded into bloom practically overnight, clouds of pink and white petals that drifted through the air like fragrant snow. The sun was shining for what felt like the first time in months, and families were emerging from their houses like creatures waking from a long hibernation, blinking in the unexpected brightness. Garrison, Celine, and Emmeline sat together on a blanket spread across the grass in Waterfront Park, the remains of a picnic scattered around them. Sandwiches and fruit and cookies that Emmeline had helped bake the night before, slightly lopsided but delicious. Emmeline was trying to teach Celine the proper technique for blowing bubble solution into specific shapes, with limited success. Not like that, the little girl giggled, taking back the bubble wand. You have to blow softer, gently, like this. She demonstrated with the gravity of a master craftsman, producing a stream of wobbly, iridescent bubbles that caught the sunlight as they drifted lazily away on the breeze. Celine tried again, producing a single lopsided bubble that popped almost immediately upon leaving the wand. I am completely hopeless at this. That is okay, Mom. I will keep teaching you. The word hung in the spring air like one of the bubbles, fragile and beautiful and miraculous. Mom. It was the first time Emmeline had called her that. Celine went completely still, the bubble wand frozen in her hand. Her eyes filled with tears that spilled over before she could stop them, and she looked at Garrison with an expression of wonder and disbelief and overwhelming joy. Garrison's own eyes were burning. He reached out and squeezed her hand tightly. She is absolutely right, you know. You really are hopeless at bubbles. Celine laughed through her tears, a sound like music, and then Emmeline was climbing into her lap for a hug, and the three of them held on to each other while the cherry blossoms fell around them like pink snow, and the bubbles drifted up toward a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. That evening, after Emmeline had been bathed and storied and tucked into bed with her stuffed elephant and her nightlight, Garrison and Celine sat together on the porch swing he had finally gotten around to installing last month. The night was warm enough to sit outside without jackets, a small miracle for Portland in April. Do you remember the night we met? Celine asked, her head resting on his shoulder. You mean the night you broke into my house and scared 10 years off my life? I have a vague recollection. She swatted his arm playfully. I did not break in. The door was unlocked. There is a significant legal distinction. Speaking of which, I still have not fixed that latch. I know, she smiled. I asked you not to. Garrison raised an eyebrow, curious. It reminds me, she explained softly, that sometimes the things that seem broken, the things we keep meaning to fix and never quite get around to, they end up being exactly what saves us. If that door had latched properly, I would never have gotten inside, and none of this would have happened. Garrison thought about that. about the door that would not close, about the wife he had lost in the 3 years of darkness that followed, about the stranger who had appeared in his bathroom at 2 in the morning, desperate and terrified and running out of hope, and had somehow led him back toward the light. "I love you," he said. It was not the first time he had said it. They had been saying it for months now, in quiet moments and loud ones, in the kitchen over breakfast, and in bed in the darkness, and in passing as they went about the ordinary business of building a life together. But it still felt new every time, still felt like a gift he was not entirely sure he deserved. "I love you too," Celine replied, and pressed closer against his side. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear night sky. Inside the house, Emmeline was not quite asleep yet. She lay in her bed holding a picture she had drawn a year ago, on the night everything had changed. The paper was worn soft at the edges now from being handled so often. The drawing showed three stick figures holding hands in front of a house, a tall one with messy brown hair, a medium one with long dark hair, a small one with pigtails. Underneath, in careful crayon letters that had taken her 3 tries to get right, she had written, "My family." Tonight she had added something new to the picture, a fourth figure, small and round with wings, floating in the sky above the house like a guardian. An angel with yellow hair, the same color as the mother she still remembered, and a blue dress, her mother's favorite color. "Good night, real mommy," Emmeline whispered to the picture, the way she did every night. "Thank you for sending her to us. We are taking good care of each other, just like you wanted." Then she tucked the picture carefully under her pillow, pulled her stuffed elephant close, and drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face. The house on the outskirts of Portland stood quiet under the stars. The windows were dark now, everyone inside finally asleep. The porch swing creaked gently in the night breeze, still warm from the bodies that had sat there watching the day end. The garden out front was coming along nicely. Flowers that Celine had planted pushing up through the soil, splashes of color that would bloom fully in another few weeks. And the back door, as always, was slightly ajar. The latch still did not catch properly, no matter how the frame had shifted or settled. It probably never would. But nobody was going to fix it. Some broken things do not need to be repaired. Some broken things, against all odds and expectations, turn out to be exactly what was needed all along. And sometimes on quiet nights like this one, if you listened closely enough, you might hear laughter drifting from inside that old house. 2 adults and 1 little girl finding their way forward together, learning that families are not always the ones you're born into. Sometimes families are the ones that find you. Sometimes they show up in your bathroom at 2 in the morning, scared and desperate, and they change everything. Sometimes all it takes is an unlocked door and the courage to leave it open.